My fiancée publicly insulted my family during our engagement dinner, so I called off the wedding, and what happened after shocked everyone. I'm a 28-year-old guy who thought I could handle anything for love. When I first met her, she had this effortless charm, elegant, composed, and genuinely warm. She laughed in a way that made you feel like you were the only person in the room who mattered. And from the first conversation, she praised me for my maturity and responsibility. I'll admit, it went straight to my head, but I liked feeling seen for once, not just by anyone, but by someone I imagined spending the rest of my life with. Her confidence was intoxicating, but there was a softness too, especially when she talked about her family, how close they were, how traditions mattered. I wanted that. I wanted to be part of that world. Meeting her family for the first time felt like stepping into a different universe. The house was immaculate, the scent of fresh flowers mingling with faint traces of home-cooked food. Her parents greeted me with polite smiles and firm handshakes. Her younger sister peeked from behind the curtains, curious but reserved. I remember the subtle hum of classical music in the background, the clinking of teacups, the way the afternoon light filtered through sheer curtains. It was intimidating, but I wanted to belong. She introduced me proudly, and I could see her mother's approving nod when I offered a polite compliment about the living room decor. She whispered under her breath, "He seems different, in a good way." And I felt a flutter of pride. Conversations flowed effortlessly. Laughter came naturally, and even the brief, awkward pauses felt charming in the soft glow of their living room. I left that day imagining a future I hadn't dared to before. Weekends together, family dinners, maybe even a ring on my finger. Love, I thought, was simple. Trust, care, and being appreciated. Little did I know, that same optimism and devotion I felt walking out their door would eventually set the stage for the kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than I could ever imagine. And yet, as I walked to my car that evening, smiling from ear to ear, a tiny voice in my head whispered, something didn't feel entirely right. After meeting her family, I was completely hooked, and I wanted everything to be perfect. Planning the engagement became my obsession. I coordinated with the caterers, picked out flowers, and even debated over table settings until my fingers ached from scrolling online catalogs. I wanted the night to reflect not just our love, but the respect I had for both our families. She seemed excited when I told her my ideas, but there was a subtle edge in her tone that I didn't notice at first. "Do you really think everyone will appreciate these choices?" she asked one afternoon, tilting her head, eyes glinting. "I just want it to feel upscale, you know?" I laughed it off, thinking she was just nervous, but something about her gaze made me pause. Friends started noticing how preoccupied I had become. "You look stressed, man," my best friend said one evening as we grabbed beers. I forced a smile, waving it off. "It's nothing. Just making sure the engagement's flawless." I told myself stress was normal when you cared about someone this much, and the thought of seeing her smile at the final setup kept me going. At home, the apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and lilies from the florist's delivery, a soft reminder that I was creating something magical. Evenings were filled with endless emails and phone calls, her voice occasionally humming over the line, approving one decision, questioning another. I tried to listen for her tone, for hidden meaning, but every time she complimented my effort, I felt reassured, until I noticed how her eyes darted toward my parents' photos on the mantel. There was this subtle, almost imperceptible tension creeping in, like a shadow over the perfect image I was trying to build. I brushed it aside, convinced love required patience and compromise. But deep down, a small knot of unease started forming, one I couldn't yet untangle. And on the night I delivered the finalized invitations to her parents, I caught her smirk at something I hadn't noticed, something I didn't understand. That smirk lingered far too long, and I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this engagement wasn't going to be as simple as I imagined. As the engagement drew closer, I started noticing little things, small comments and sideways glances that didn't sit right with me. It began almost imperceptibly, like a faint crack in an otherwise perfect mirror. She would smirk when my mom asked a simple question about the menu or the seating arrangements, or roll her eyes ever so slightly when my sister suggested a decoration idea. I tried to chalk it up to nerves or cultural differences, convincing myself I was overreacting. "You're reading too much into it," I whispered to myself one night, scrolling through our engagement checklist. But every tiny dig, every subtle dismissive gesture, gnawed at me quietly. During one of our pre-dinner visits, she leaned toward me, lowering her voice. "Honestly, your family's so basic," she said, smiling as if sharing a secret. My stomach dropped. I laughed nervously, forcing a joke. "Well, they have their charms," I said, hoping she'd drop it. But she didn't. Instead, she let the words hang in the air, like a weight only I could feel. The house was warm, filled with the smell of freshly baked bread and the faint perfume of flowers on the mantel. Sunlight streamed lazily through the windows, illuminating the antique frames of my childhood photos that lined the hallway. Every corner of my life was on display, and yet her gaze seemed to skim past them with casual disregard, as if they were meaningless. Even my friends noticed the tension. "She seems a little sharp with your family," one whispered during a casual dinner. I forced a smile, pretending not to feel the knot tightening in my chest. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, that love required patience, tolerance, and trust. But as I left that day, watching her walk gracefully behind me, I felt a strange unease creeping in, a whisper that maybe her charm masked something darker. The more I tried to dismiss it, the more it lingered, like a shadow at the edge of my vision, hinting that my dream engagement might already be on shaky ground. The night of the engagement dinner finally arrived, and I felt a mix of excitement and nerves I hadn't anticipated. The hall was perfectly decorated. Soft golden lights hung above the tables, floral arrangements smelled faintly of jasmine, and the gentle clink of cutlery added a subtle rhythm to the soft background music. Guests were arriving, laughter spilling through the room, and I caught my fiancée gliding between conversations, charming everyone with ease. I felt proud, imagining that we were stepping into a perfect night, one that would mark the beginning of our future together. At first, things went smoothly, toasts were made, everyone smiled, and I held her hand across the table, hoping she felt the same joy I did. But then, a subtle shift began. During the appetizer, she made a small remark about my mother's choice of dress, lighthearted on the surface, but sharp underneath. "Oh, that's cute," she said, tilting her head and glancing around as if checking to see if others agreed with her. My mother's smile faltered, and I felt a tightening in my chest. I tried to brush it off with humor. "Mom, you look beautiful." "Don't let her tease you," I whispered, squeezing my mother's hand. She gave me a small, grateful smile, but her eyes betrayed a hint of hurt I couldn't ignore. The air suddenly felt heavier, the soft murmur of conversations now punctuated by an awkward tension I couldn't dissolve. Then she started making more subtle digs at my younger siblings, joking about their college choices and career ambitions in a way that made the room stiffen. Laughter erupted in some corners, but it felt uneasy, forced. I wanted to intervene, to tell her to stop, but I hesitated, unsure how to handle the growing storm. By the time the main course was served, I realized something was off. This wasn't just nerves or cultural differences. A faint dread settled over me, like the prelude to a storm, and I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight might not end the way I had imagined. By the time dessert was being served, the subtle digs had turned into something unmistakable. She was openly mocking my family. My stomach churned as she leaned across the table, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I mean, honestly, your family's a little, how should I say, unsophisticated, she said, smirking like it was a harmless joke. Laughter bubbled around the table, some nervous, some genuinely amused. But my mother's face went pale, her hands gripping the tablecloth. I could feel heat rising to my ears, my chest tightening as anger and disbelief collided. I tried to intervene, forcing a smile that felt hollow. "Hey, come on, that's enough," I said, keeping my voice calm, though my hands trembled slightly. She laughed, a sharp, self-satisfied sound. "I'm just being honest," she replied, shrugging, eyes darting around as if daring someone to disagree. Guests murmured, unsure where to look or what to say. The room smelled faintly of roasted meat and candles, but the sweet scents couldn't mask the tension coiling around us. My father cleared his throat, trying to shift the conversation, but she ignored him, picking up on another target. "And, oh, I guess we all know why your brother never left home," she added, her words dripping with mockery. And this time, some of the cousins actually laughed. I felt a wave of humiliation crash over me. My family's pride, our shared history, the countless sacrifices we had made, it was all being torn down in front of everyone I loved. My heart pounded, and my hands clenched into fists under the table. I wanted to speak, to defend them, but the words caught in my throat. Something inside me shifted in that moment, a mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I realized that this wasn't a slip, a joke, or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, and it was public. And I knew, deep down, that whatever I did next would change everything. I knew I had to do something, anything, before this night spiraled completely out of control. I straightened in my chair, took a slow, steadying breath, and tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Let's just focus on celebrating tonight," I said, forcing a smile I barely felt. My voice sounded calm, even to me, but inside, my mind was racing. Every insult, every mocking laugh still echoed in my head, and I could feel the tight knot in my stomach growing heavier with each passing second. She looked at me, eyes glinting, like she was daring me to stop her. "Oh, I'm just having fun," she said, voice sweet but cutting. I could feel the tension radiating from my parents, my siblings, even the distant relatives who had quietly arrived, expecting a warm, celebratory evening. I tried cracking a light joke to diffuse it. "Well, at least the desserts are good, right?" I said, pointing at the chocolate cake. Some guests laughed politely, but I noticed a few eyebrows raise in concern. The dining room smelled of jasmine candles mixed with the faint tang of wine, but the aroma did nothing to calm my nerves. The soft clinking of glasses and silverware only highlighted the awkward silence following her words. My mother's hand brushed mine under the table, her eyes pleading for me to handle it. I squeezed her hand, wanting to protect her, yet knowing I couldn't shield her from everything. I attempted a private word with her later, leaning close, whispering, "Please, can we stop? You're hurting everyone here." She smiled, a flash of smugness, and brushed past me. "Relax, it's just a little fun. Don't be so sensitive," she said, and walked back to the table, laughing softly with some distant cousin. I felt a mixture of frustration, humiliation, and disbelief. I wanted to explode, to call her out in front of everyone, but something in me held back. My desire to save the night, to preserve at least a semblance of dignity. But deep down, I knew the dam was about to break, and soon nothing would be able to contain the truth of what she had done. It all hit me at once during the main course. She had crossed every line I thought was inviolable. She leaned back in her chair, glass in hand, and laughed at something she said about my family's financial status. I mean, it's really cute how you all try, but let's be honest. This is not exactly the lifestyle we're used to, she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. My chest felt like it had been punched, heat flooding my face as a mix of anger, shame, and disbelief collided inside me. Guests froze, unsure how to respond, some glancing at me for guidance, others trying to hide their own amusement. I could smell the rich aroma of the roasted lamb on the table, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with it, and it made the humiliation feel suffocating. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes glistening. My father's jaw tightened, and even my siblings looked stunned. I felt powerless, trapped between my instinct to protect my family and the fear of making the scene worse. "Why are you being so dramatic?" she added, smirking at my reaction. I wanted to shout, to make her stop, to defend everything I loved, but my voice caught in my throat. My hands shook under the table, fingers clenching the edge, as if I could anchor myself to sanity. I realized then that no polite words, no smiles, no attempts at humor would fix this. She had made it clear my family was beneath her, and she enjoyed proving it. In that moment, I hit rock bottom. I felt humiliated, powerless, and betrayed, not just by her, but by the idea that someone I trusted could weaponize love in front of everyone I cared about. Every dream I had built for that night, every fantasy of a joyful engagement, crumbled into sharp, jagged pieces inside me. And as she laughed again, glancing around the room, I knew the decision I had to make would change everything forever. I finally stood up, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me, and for the first time that night, I felt a strange clarity amidst the chaos. The heat from my embarrassment and anger fused into resolve. "This engagement is over," I said, my voice steady but firm, carrying across the table. There was a stunned silence, broken only by her gasp and the shuffling of guests in their seats. Fiancée's face twisted in disbelief, then anger. "You can't just... What? How dare you embarrass me?" she shouted, rising from her chair. The smell of the candlelit room, the faint aroma of dessert, even the soft hum of conversation around us. It all seemed to fade into a background haze as I held my ground. My mother's hands shook slightly as she reached for mine, tears brimming in her eyes. My father exhaled slowly, relief and pride mingling on his face. Guests whispered, some nodding in approval, others glancing uneasily between us. I took a deep breath, forcing the words past the tightness in my chest. "Respect for family is not optional," I said, "and I will not marry someone who belittles the people I love in front of everyone." Her laughter faltered, replaced by a flash of anger and shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words could undo the moment. A few relatives began murmuring, shifting uncomfortably as the reality of the situation sank in. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, a strange combination of fear, relief, and empowerment coursing through me. The knot in my chest that had been tightening all night finally loosened, replaced by a sense of moral clarity I hadn't known I possessed. And as she stormed out, muttering threats and insults under her breath, I realized the night was far from over. There would be consequences, judgments, and gossip, but for the first time, I knew I had done the right thing. And deep down, I understood that the real test, what would happen after, was only just beginning. The minutes after she stormed out felt surreal, like the room had shifted on its axis. My parents moved toward me, enveloping me in quiet hugs, their hands trembling slightly. "We're proud of you," my mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. My siblings stood a few steps behind, wide-eyed, and I saw a mix of relief and admiration on their faces. The tension in the room was palpable, but instead of shame, I felt a strange warmth, like I had finally done the right thing, even if it had humiliated everyone involved. Guests lingered awkwardly, unsure of how to react. Some approached cautiously, offering sympathetic smiles, murmuring things like, "That took courage," or "I can't believe she said that." The soft scent of jasmine candles and leftover dessert hung in the air, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. It was strangely calming, a reminder that we were still intact, still a family. I realized that for the first time that evening, I wasn't trying to save appearances. I was saving my family from further humiliation and myself from a toxic relationship. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from friends, some laughing in disbelief, others expressing shock at the audacity of her insults. Even a few distant relatives called later that night, voicing support and subtly commiserating about her behavior. I felt validated, not because I had publicly won, but because my instincts had been right all along. Sitting quietly with my parents afterward, I reflected on the anger, the humiliation, and the betrayal I had endured. It was exhausting, but it also reminded me of what mattered most. Love, I realized, wasn't about perfection or charm. It was about respect, loyalty, and shared values. But even as relief settled over me, a flicker of unease remained. I knew she wasn't done, and that the social and emotional fallout of that night would stretch far beyond the walls of that engagement hall. Something told me the story wasn't over yet, and that the real surprises were still ahead. The next few days were surreal. I thought the worst was over, that the engagement ending would close the chapter. But then the truth started surfacing, and it hit harder than any insult that night. A mutual friend, someone I trusted completely, reached out with a message I wasn't ready for. "Hey, I think you should know," they said hesitantly. "She's done this before, with someone else's family. She enjoys humiliating people, testing how much control she can exert." I felt my stomach drop. Every joke, every slight, every smirk from the engagement night suddenly clicked into place. It wasn't about nerves. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It had been deliberate. She had a history, a pattern, and I had unknowingly stepped into it. "Are you serious?" I typed back, my hands shaking. They sent screenshots, messages, and even stories from people I hadn't known, painting a picture of manipulation, entitlement, and emotional cruelty. I stared at my phone, the room around me fading into the background. The faint smell of leftover coffee from that morning, the dull hum of my refrigerator, it all seemed distant, insignificant. What mattered was the reality I hadn't seen. I had been lucky to escape before she embedded herself deeper into my life. I called my parents and siblings, telling them what I had learned. My mother's voice trembled, a mixture of relief and anger. "You did the right thing," she said softly. My younger brother, usually sarcastic and teasing, was quiet, almost reverent. "She would have caused nothing but pain," he said simply. The twist was brutal, but necessary. It validated everything I had felt that night. The unease, the subtle digs, the final crushing humiliation. I realized how close I had come to marrying someone whose entire joy was built on making others feel small. And as the initial shock settled into clarity, I understood one thing. This wasn't just an engagement gone wrong. It was a narrowly avoided disaster. and now I had the chance to reclaim my life entirely. But even with that knowledge, I couldn't shake the lingering worry. She wasn't finished, and neither was the fallout. After learning the truth, I felt a strange combination of anger, relief, and determination. I realized I wasn't just reclaiming a failed engagement. I was reclaiming my dignity, my family's honor, and my own sense of self-worth. I began speaking openly to friends, relatives, and even a few distant acquaintances who had been at the engagement. "I'm done," I told them calmly. "Respect is non-negotiable. Anyone who belittles my family isn't welcome in my life." The reactions were incredible. Messages of support flooded in, strangers and friends alike expressing admiration for standing up and drawing clear boundaries. The social media chatter started too. While part of me dreaded the gossip, it quickly turned into validation. Friends tagged me, shared my story, and even people I barely knew reached out, telling me they had experienced similar betrayals. I realized I wasn't alone, that the humiliation I had endured had a larger resonance, and that my choice to act decisively inspired others. At home, the atmosphere changed too. My parents were calmer, more relaxed. My mother hugged me tightly one evening, whispering, "You protected us and yourself. That's all that matters." My siblings teased me gently, joking about how I had handled the monster, but their smiles were genuine, warm, full of relief. The house felt lighter, freer, as if the toxic weight of her presence had finally been lifted. I even confronted the aftermath on my own terms, cutting off all contact, blocking her on social media, and making sure there were no lingering manipulations. Each step, each boundary enforced, gave me a growing sense of power. I was no longer a passive participant in someone else's games. I was actively shaping my life. And yet, as I looked back on the engagement hall, the whispered insults, and the stunned faces of the guests, I felt something stronger than relief. I felt empowerment. I had survived the betrayal, and I had turned it into a moment of triumph. But deep down, I knew the final chapter, the ultimate closure, was still waiting, quietly, just around the corner. Looking back now, I realize that night changed everything. Not just my engagement, but how I view love, respect, and my own boundaries. I remember the walk to my car afterward, the crisp night air brushing against my face, the faint hum of distant traffic, and how calm I felt despite the chaos I had left behind. For the first time, I understood that walking away from someone who disrespected me and my family wasn't failure, it was strength. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a strange rhythm. I spent time with my parents and siblings, laughing, cooking together, and talking late into the nights about everything except her. Each moment reminded me of what really mattered: family, trust, and integrity. I also allowed myself to process the anger, betrayal, and shock, acknowledging that these emotions were valid, but that they didn't have to control me. Messages continued to pour in from friends and even distant acquaintances who had heard about the engagement. "You handled it perfectly," one friend wrote. "I wish I had your courage." That validation wasn't about ego. It was proof that standing up for what's right resonates with others, that integrity is contagious, and that silence in the face of disrespect is never required. And the ironic twist? She tried to spread rumors, but almost no one listened. The more she tried, the more her true nature became apparent. People could see the manipulation, the arrogance, the cruelty, and it backfired spectacularly. Meanwhile, my family's respect for me and my own self-respect grew exponentially. I finally understood the lesson I had been blind to while planning the perfect engagement. Love without respect is dangerous, and loyalty without boundaries is self-destruction. Walking away wasn't just a choice, it was liberation. And as I sit here today, reflecting on that night, I feel empowered, validated, and at peace, knowing I not only protected my family, but also reclaimed my life from someone who would have slowly destroyed it. The night that began with humiliation ended with clarity, strength, and an unshakable sense of justice. I had survived betrayal, and I emerged stronger.